A first alert update on a criminal case in Chippewa County. According to court documents, lawyers of the boy accused of killing 10-year-old Lily Peters want to move the case to juvenile court as he's only 15 years old. The district attorney is strongly against that. The suspect is a boy with the initials CPB and was 14 years old at the time of the killing. Chippewa County District Attorney Wade Newell says all three requirements to move the boy out of adult court have not been met. In order to move the boy, lawyers need to prove that he would not receive adequate treatment in adult court, that moving the case would not depreciate the seriousness of the offense, and that it would not fail to deter other juveniles from committing similar crimes. Newell says the actions of CPB were premeditated, violent, and egregious in nature, which would depreciate the seriousness of the defense. A tentative court date for the judge to rule on this matter is now scheduled for January.